The night sky above Earth was darker than usual. No stars shone brightly that evening. Instead, all eyes were glued to a broadcast flickering on every screen across the globe. It was an emergency transmission. The message came from Earth's most advanced satellites, their sensors picking up something the world had never seen before, something that sent a wave of fear down every spine. Alien ships. The ships appeared out of nowhere, slowly creeping into Earth's orbit. Massive and terrifying, they seemed to blot out the very stars themselves. These weren't just any alien ships. They were warships capable of wiping out entire cities with a single strike. Each ship was colossal, like floating fortresses of steel and firepower. Their presence in Earth's sky was more than just a threat. It was a sign of doom. The voice on the screen, steady but filled with urgency, spoke about the attackers, the Zorak, a name that sent chills down the spines of even the bravest warriors across the galaxy. The Zorak weren't just an alien race. They were the apex predators of the universe, fearsome and ruthless. They had obliterated countless civilizations, leaving only ruins in their wake. Every species that had encountered them had learned the same painful lesson. When the Zorak come, resistance is futile. Earth's own leaders scrambled to respond. They quickly realized how outmatched they were. The Zorak's technology was light years ahead of humanity's, and their sheer power seemed unstoppable. Reports flooded in from military bases worldwide. Soldiers, generals, and even the most advanced artificial intelligence were powerless in the face of this threat. Earth's defenses, even the most powerful weapons, stood no chance against the Zorak's overwhelming might. As the broadcast continued, it painted a grim picture. The Zorak didn't just conquer planets. They destroyed them for sport. They delighted in watching civilizations crumble, their advanced weapons reducing cities to ash. The thought that Earth, a young and relatively insignificant world, could stand up to them seemed laughable. The Zorak weren't here to negotiate or make deals. They were here to wipe humanity from the galaxy forever. The camera zoomed in on the alien warships hovering menacingly above Earth's cities, their dark shapes casting shadows over the planet. The whole world held its breath. Panic spread like wildfire. People rushed into underground shelters, hoping to escape whatever was coming. The streets were filled with chaos, as nations around the globe tried to organize some form of defense. Governments that had once thought of Earth as invincible now realized that they were powerless against such a force. Humanity's most advanced military leaders were on the front lines, their eyes filled with uncertainty. What could they possibly do against the Zorak? The worst part was that there seemed to be no hope. The clock was ticking, and Earth's time was running out. The Zorak's ships grew larger on radar, and each minute that passed only made the inevitable closer. Humanity could do nothing but watch in terror as the invaders came closer. No one had ever encountered a force so mighty. In their desperation, Earth's leaders began to consider extreme measures. But deep down, everyone knew it would be pointless. The Zorak were unstoppable, and it seemed that Earth's final hour had arrived. However, just as the world seemed to accept its fate, something changed. There was a shift in the air, a subtle but significant feeling that perhaps, just perhaps, humanity wouldn't go down without a fight. Among the chaos and panic, a figure stood tall, looking out from the command center of Earth's last line of defense. Captain Jackson, the leader of Earth's special forces, was no ordinary soldier. He had seen war on countless worlds, fought through the darkest hours, and led his men through hell itself. Tall and rugged, with a face hardened by years of battle, he was a man whose presence inspired those around him. Jackson stood at the front of the war room, his eyes scanning the screens that displayed the incoming alien fleet. The weight of the situation was heavy, but it didn't show on his face. His expression was focused, unyielding. As he watched the alien ships draw closer, he thought back to everything humanity had endured. It had always seemed like humanity was the underdog, the ones everyone overlooked, the ones who were never supposed to win. And yet, time and time again, They had found a way to survive. Against all odds, Earth had risen. Against all odds, humanity had survived. Jackson's mind raced with calculations, but he wasn't just thinking of military tactics. He was thinking of his people, his soldiers, and the countless civilians who would soon face the Zorak's wrath. He had seen defeat before, but this was different. He wasn't ready to let Earth fall. Not now. Not when there was still a chance to fight. The message he had always shared with his team was simple: we don't stop fighting until it's over. As Jackson scanned the room, his eyes met those of his fellow commanders. They all knew the odds were slim. But they also knew something about humanity that the Zorak could never understand. The will to survive, the drive to keep going no matter what. Even in the face of certain destruction, Earth's people would fight with everything they had. Jackson was ready to lead them into battle. He had no choice. The survival of Earth rested on his shoulders. Outside the command center, the sounds of alarm bells rang out, echoing throughout the base. Jackson could hear the hum of ships preparing for launch, the frantic calls of soldiers ready to face their doom. But through it all, he remained calm. He knew the world was on the brink of destruction, but he was determined not to let that be the end of humanity's story. As the alien ships loomed ever closer, Jackson felt a familiar sense of resolve take hold. The Zorak might have superior firepower, but they had never faced Earth before. And Earth, no matter how outmatched it seemed, had something the Zorak didn't: the unbreakable spirit of humanity. With a deep breath, Captain Jackson turned to his team. "It's not over," he said. "We fight to the last man. And even then, we never surrender." His words rang out, cutting through the tension in the room. The team, despite the fear that gripped them, nodded in silent agreement. They would follow Jackson to the end, just as they always had. As the minutes ticked by, the Zorak continued their descent. But in the hearts of Earth's defenders, a glimmer of hope flickered. They might have been facing the most terrifying predators in the galaxy, but they would never go down without a fight. The battle for Earth had only just begun. The suspense was unbearable, the tension rising with every passing second. Would humanity survive, or was the end truly inevitable? Captain Jackson knew the answer. He wasn't ready to give up, and as long as he drew breath, he would make sure Earth wasn't either. The moment the Zorak warships unleashed their full power, Earth was plunged into chaos. The skies above the planet turned into a battlefield, filled with streaks of laser fire and explosions that lit up the darkened atmosphere. The first assault came with an overwhelming force. Earth's defenses, no matter how advanced they seemed, were no match for the sheer power of the Zorak. Their warships cloaked themselves in near invisibility, slipping through Earth's radar undetected. The military scrambled to react, but it was too late. The Zorak were already upon them. Jackson watched in horror as one of Earth's most powerful satellites disintegrated in an instant, a blinding flash of light, marking its destruction. The Zorak didn't just attack, they annihilated everything in their path. Military installations that had taken decades to build were reduced to rubble in mere moments. The resistance that Earth's forces had prepared for was a joke in the face of the Zorak's might. Soldiers, robots, and even the most advanced AI systems were thrown into disarray as they tried to respond to the relentless assault. As the cities below burned and fires raged in the streets, Jackson's heart pounded. He knew this was only the beginning of Earth's suffering. It was as though the Zorak enjoyed watching the destruction unfold. Each blast, each piece of debris that rained down from the sky was a reminder of just how outclassed humanity was. But Jackson wasn't the type to back down. He turned to his team, his voice steady despite the terror that gripped everyone else. "We need to hold them off, long enough for the civilians to evacuate." His words were more than just orders. They were a rallying cry. Jackson's team, a group of seasoned soldiers who had fought side by side through countless battles, nodded without hesitation. They were ready as they could be. They didn't have much, no advanced tech or powerful weapons like the Zorak, but they had something else: each other. And that was something the Zorak could never understand. The team was immediately dispatched to one of Earth's last defenses, a fortified command center in the city of New York. From here, they could coordinate the evacuation and try to slow the Zorak down. Jackson's team moved quickly, with every step filled with purpose. They weren't just soldiers now. They were humanity's last line of defense. As they arrived at the command center, the sounds of war surrounded them. Explosions shook the ground, and the distant screams of people could be heard. The streets were filled with chaos, with civilians running for their lives, hoping to find safety. But there was no safety. The Zorak were everywhere, and their power was like nothing Earth had ever faced. Jackson's team had no choice but to engage. They fought with everything they had, using every bit of training and ingenuity they could muster. But it wasn't enough. The Zorak soldiers were unlike anything Earth had ever seen. They were enhanced with cybernetic technology, their bodies almost indestructible. Each one seemed to have a personal cloaking device, allowing them to appear out of nowhere, attacking from the shadows. Even Earth's most advanced Orion, warned them about the Zorak's technological superiority. "Captain," Orion's voice crackled through their communications. "The Zorak are not only using cloaking devices, but their soldiers are augmented with cybernetics. They're stronger, faster, and tougher than anything we've encountered. You won't be able to stop them without heavier weapons." But Jackson didn't have time to worry about that. His team was already under attack. The Zorak moved with terrifying precision, their soldiers appearing in front of them with no warning. The first wave was like a nightmare come to life. Jackson ducked behind cover as a Zorak soldier fired a laser that nearly took his head off. His soldiers returned fire, but it was like fighting ghosts. The Zorak were everywhere, and their weapons were far too powerful for the humans to handle. The fight raged on for what felt like hours, but in reality, it was only minutes. The Zorak showed no mercy, tearing through everything in their path. Jackson watched helplessly as one of his soldiers, Bonner, was dragged away by a Zorak soldier. Bonner was one of Jackson's closest friends. He was a seasoned veteran, always the first to step into the fight, always the one to make sure his comrades were safe. Jackson had always relied on him, trusted him to have his back. But now, Bonner was gone. Jackson's heart sank as he saw Bonner struggle in the grip of the Zorak soldier. It was a terrifying sight. Bonner, who had always been so full of life, now locked in a desperate battle for his own survival. Jackson's hands tightened around his weapon, ready to fire, but he knew it was too late. Bonner wasn't going to make it out. Without thinking, Jackson dashed toward the Zorak soldier, firing at anything that moved. He needed to save Bonner. But as he neared, he realized that the Zorak soldier wasn't just holding Bonner captive. He was preparing to finish him off. In that moment, Bonner did something that Jackson would never forget. He let go of his weapon, turned to face Jackson, and pushed him aside. "Get out of here, Captain," Bonner shouted, his voice filled with pain. "I'll hold them off." It was a sacrifice that Jackson never expected, but it was one that he understood. Bonner was giving his life to save him, to buy the team enough time to fight back. The Zorak soldier didn't hesitate. He raised his weapon and fired, and Bonner's body crumpled to the ground, lifeless. Jackson froze for a moment, grief and rage coursing through him. He wanted to scream, to charge at the Zorak, to take them all down for what they had done. But he knew there was no time for that. Bonner's sacrifice had to mean something. It had to. "Let's finish this," Jackson growled, his voice low and filled with fury. He turned to his team, his eyes blazing with determination. For Bonner, for Earth. The team fought harder than ever, their resolve strengthened by the loss of their comrade. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about making the Zorak pay for what they had taken from them. The emotional weight of Bonner's death fueled their every move, giving them the strength to keep fighting, even when it seemed like the odds were against them. As the battle continued, Jackson knew that this fight was far from over. The Zorak may have the power to destroy entire worlds, but they didn't understand the strength of humanity. The strength to rise, to fight back, and to keep going, no matter how impossible the odds seemed. The first assault had only just begun, and already, humanity had shown the Zorak that they were not so easily defeated. But there was a long way to go, and more sacrifices to be made. For now, though, Jackson would carry Bonner's memory with him, and the fight would go on. The battle was in full swing, but Jackson and his team were fighting a losing battle. Every step they took, every move they made, the Zorak retaliated with overwhelming force. Humanity's technology, no matter how advanced it had seemed just days ago, was nothing compared to the Zoraks. Their cloaking devices, cybernetic soldiers, and superior firepower were more than enough to crush Earth's resistance. Yet, amid all this destruction, Jackson's mind was working furiously, trying to find a way to fight back. It seemed hopeless, but Jackson wasn't the kind of leader to give up without a fight. His thoughts raced, his eyes scanning the battlefield, trying to find something, anything, that could turn the tide. And then, in a moment of clarity, it came to him. It wasn't about technology, weapons, or firepower. It was something simpler, something that had been forgotten in the rush to develop advanced systems and machines. It was an old Earth tactic, a symbol of defiance that had been passed down through generations. A slap of defiance. A simple act, but one that carried deep meaning. It was a gesture that said, "No matter how powerful you are, we will not bow to you." It was humanity's resilience in the face of impossible odds. Jackson quickly shared his epiphany with his team, and while they were skeptical, they knew that in the face of such overwhelming power, they had little else to lose. The plan was simple, almost absurd, but it was all they had. If they were going to survive, they needed to show the Zorak that humanity wouldn't just roll over and die. They had to make a statement, no matter how small. The slap was a last-ditch effort, a symbol that could, perhaps, be the catalyst for something bigger, something that could disrupt the Zorak's overwhelming arrogance. As if on cue, the massive shadow of a Zorak warship loomed overhead, and the ground beneath Jackson's feet trembled. The air grew heavy with tension. This was no ordinary attack. The Zorak warlord himself, Vrax, had arrived. Vrax was everything the Zorak stood for: tall, imposing, and terrifying. His body was augmented with advanced cybernetic technology that made him appear almost invincible. His eyes, glowing with a menacing red hue, scanned the battlefield as he strode toward Jackson. His laughter echoed through the air as he approached, a deep, booming sound that sent chills down everyone's spine. "You think you can defeat us?" Vrax's voice was mocking, filled with disdain. "You, weak little humans, are nothing but insects beneath our boots. Your technology is primitive. Your people are helpless. You will all be crushed, just like the others before you." Jackson stood firm, his chest rising and falling with each breath. His team stood behind him, weapons drawn and ready. But Jackson knew there was no way they could fight Vrax directly, not with their weapons, not with their technology. They were outmatched. And yet, in that moment, Jackson realized something. The Zorak's biggest flaw was their arrogance. They believed they were untouchable, and that arrogance could be their downfall. Vrax stopped in front of Jackson, towering over him with a sneer. He raised his hand, as though preparing to strike. But Jackson didn't flinch. His mind raced as he thought about the slap. How simple it was, how bold, how utterly unexpected. It wasn't the kind of thing a leader like Jackson would typically do, but in this moment, it was exactly what they needed. Without warning, Jackson stepped forward, raising his hand to Vrax's face. The Zorak warlord's eyes narrowed, his cybernetic enhancements detecting Jackson's movement a split second too late. And then, in one swift motion, Jackson slapped Vrax across the face. The sound of the slap rang through the air, shocking everyone in the vicinity. For a brief moment, Everything seemed to freeze. Jackson's team stood in stunned silence, and even the Zorak soldiers hesitated, unsure of what to do. Vrax, the seemingly invincible warlord, staggered back, his face twisting in surprise and anger. His cybernetic implants, designed to make him impervious to pain, malfunctioned for just a moment. It was a small opening, but it was all the humans needed. Vrax growled, his hands clenched into fists, his eyes glowing with fury. "You dare," he snarled, but his voice was no longer as confident. There was a tremor in his tone, a hint of disbelief that someone as small and insignificant as a human, had the audacity to strike him. Jackson didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, grabbing a nearby weapon and firing at the Zorak soldiers, taking advantage of Vrax's brief moment of vulnerability. The humans, seeing their leader take such bold action, followed suit. They fought with renewed vigor, knowing that the battle was far from over. The slap had done more than just surprise the Zorak. It had shaken them, rattled their confidence, and revealed a flaw in their seemingly perfect facade. The Zorak were no longer invincible. The humans pressed forward, fighting with everything they had. Jackson's team, now emboldened by their small victory, pushed back against the Zorak forces. The chaos that had once seemed endless now had a purpose. The Zorak's arrogance, their overconfidence, was their downfall. The humans were fighting back, and they weren't going down without a fight. Vrax, still reeling from the slap, snarled and called for his soldiers to regroup. But the damage had been done. The humans had found their first crack in the Zorak's armor. An unexpected, yet powerful reminder that even the mightiest of creatures had weaknesses. And the humans, though outmatched in technology, were more than capable of exploiting those weaknesses. As Jackson and his team fought on, they knew this was just the beginning. The Zorak were still a formidable enemy, but the slap of defiance had given them a fighting chance. It had shown them that, no matter how powerful the enemy, there was always a way to fight back. The fight for Earth had only just begun, and Jackson's team had learned a valuable lesson. Never underestimate the power of defiance. The air was thick with tension as Jackson's team stood on the precipice of their most daring move yet. The slap had worked. A single moment of defiance had rattled the Zorak, and now humanity had a chance to turn the tide. The Zorak warlord Vrax had been temporarily stunned, and Jackson knew this was their moment to strike. There would be no second chances. With a sense of urgency, Jackson issued the order. "Move out. All units. Execute the counterattack." The plan was risky. Humanity's technology was still far behind the Zoraks, but in this crucial moment, it didn't matter. Jackson's team was armed with experimental cloaking devices, and they intended to use these to infiltrate the heart of the Zorak mothership, the source of their overwhelming power. The Zorak had never encountered anything like this before. They believed themselves to be untouchable, but humanity was about to prove otherwise. The cloaking devices worked by bending light, rendering the soldiers nearly invisible to enemy sensors. As the team activated their devices, the city around them seemed to vanish, leaving only shadows in the moonlit night. They moved quickly and silently through the ruins of the once thriving city, where explosions still echoed in the distance. It was a ghost town now, but in the silence, Jackson's team felt a pulse of determination surge through them. This was their home, and they weren't going to let it fall. As they neared the Zorak mothership, the soldiers split up, using their knowledge of the terrain to their advantage. The Zorak had no idea they were coming. The battle outside raged on, but Jackson's team had a different target in mind. Their first objective was to disable the ship's defense systems. The team's guerrilla tactics were put to the test. They moved swiftly through the shadows, taking down any Zorak soldiers that got in their way. The Zorak might have the numbers, but the humans had something far more powerful: determination. And that's what set them apart. They knew the stakes. The fate of Earth rested on their shoulders. As Jackson and his team infiltrated the ship, the tension was palpable. The Zorak warship was a colossal structure, made of black metal that seemed to absorb the light around it. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with the hum of alien machinery and the cold, calculated movements of the Zorak soldiers. The team moved quickly, planting explosives on critical systems and hacking into the ship's control systems, causing the Zorak's advanced technology to sputter and flicker. Outside, the fight continued. Orbital bombardments rained down from above, striking the Zorak warships in a brutal display of human resilience. The humans had brought everything they had to bear against the invaders. Despite the chaos around them, Jackson's team pushed forward, never once faltering. The intensity of the action was unmatched. Jackson could feel his heart racing as his team cleared room after room inside the Zorak mothership. The air was charged with energy, and the sense of urgency was overwhelming. But even in the midst of it all, there was a certain calm that washed over Jackson. His focus was laser-sharp. Every decision, every move, had to be perfect. The camera panned across the battlefield, capturing the relentless speed and chaos of the assault. Robotic enemies clashed with human soldiers in close-quarters combat, sparks flying as weapons met in a brutal exchange of blows. In the distance, massive explosions sent shockwaves through the city, ripping apart Zorak warships as they fell from the sky. The humans had their backs against the wall, but they weren't backing down. A group of Zorak soldiers burst into the room where Jackson's team was planting explosives. A firefight erupted, the sound of gunfire filling the air. Jackson and his soldiers took cover behind the remnants of a destroyed wall, returning fire with precision. They were outnumbered, but they were far from outmatched. Jackson's team was a well-oiled machine, each member moving with practiced ease. They knew their enemy, and they knew the stakes. Push forward, Jackson barked as he reloaded his weapon. We've got one shot at this. His voice rang with the authority of a man who had seen the worst of the war, but still had the strength to lead. The team moved as one, taking out the Zorak soldiers with ruthless efficiency. Their bodies fell to the ground as the humans advanced, each step bringing them closer to their goal. In the chaos, the camera zoomed in on Jackson's face. His eyes were fierce, his jaw set with determination. He was the anchor in the storm, the leader who refused to let his team fail. As they pushed deeper into the heart of the Zorak ship, he could feel the weight of the mission bearing down on him. The fate of Earth was in their hands. The assault continued, the pace quickening as the humans pressed forward. Explosions rocked the ship, sending vibrations through the metal walls. The Zorak soldiers, realizing that their once impenetrable fortress was being breached, scrambled to regroup. But it was too late. Jackson's team was already inside, and they were moving fast. With a final push, they reached the central core of the mothership, the heart of the Zorak's technological might. The air was thick with the hum of alien energy, but the humans had no time to waste. They planted the last of their explosives and activated the cloaking devices again, vanishing into the shadows just as the Zorak soldiers closed in. The countdown began. Outside, the battle was reaching its climax. The Zorak warships in orbit were under heavy fire, their shields weakening as the humans' final assault pushed them to the brink. It was a desperate race against time. The humans had only a few minutes before the explosives went off, and they needed to make sure the Zorak couldn't stop them. The camera cut between the action on the ground and in space, the two battles unfolding in parallel. In the city, Jackson's team fought tooth and nail to keep the Zorak forces at bay. Each explosion, each burst of gunfire, was a step closer to victory, but time was running out. Finally, with a deafening roar, the Zorak mothership exploded, sending a shockwave that ripped through the battlefield. The blast sent debris flying in every direction, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. The Zorak's once impenetrable fortress had been destroyed. The humans had struck back, and they had done it with sheer willpower and determination. As the dust settled, Jackson stood tall, his chest heaving with exhaustion. He looked out over the battlefield, his heart pounding in his chest. The fight was far from over, But for the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope. Humanity had struck back, and they had shown the Zorak that no matter how powerful they were, they could be defeated. This wasn't just a battle for survival, it was a battle for Earth's future. And Jackson and his team had just proven that they were willing to fight to the very end. The fight had been long and brutal, but the end was finally within reach. The humans had pushed the Zorak to their limits, and now it was time for the final confrontation. The Zorak mothership loomed overhead, a massive vessel of destruction that had been the heart of the enemy's power. But now, that power was slipping away. Jackson and his team had infiltrated the ship, destroyed its defenses, and crippled its technology. The time had come for the ultimate battle. As Jackson and his team boarded the Zorak mothership for the final assault, they knew that they were no longer fighting just for survival. This was no longer about holding back the enemy or buying time. This was the endgame, the moment when everything would be decided. Their faces were grim, their eyes steely with determination. The battle for Earth had come to this. They had come this far, and there was no turning back. The Zorak warlord, Vrax, was waiting for them. He had been a shadow, a cold, calculating presence throughout the war, using his vast technological advantage to overwhelm humanity. But now, with his systems malfunctioning and his warship slowly falling apart, Vrax was enraged. The technological advantage he had once relied on had betrayed him, and the loss of that power had left him vulnerable. This was no longer a fight of technology versus technology. This was a battle of strength, willpower, and heart. Vrax strode forward, his towering form a picture of pure fury. His cybernetic enhancements hummed with power as he glared down at Jackson. The warlord's eyes were full of contempt, as though he couldn't fathom how these mere humans had managed to get this far. "You think you can defeat me?" Vrax sneered, his voice booming through the ship's corridors. "You are nothing but insects, and I will crush you beneath my boot." Jackson, undeterred, stood tall. "You're wrong," he said, his voice steady, unwavering. "We're not insects. We're humans, and we fight for everything we love." Vrax's laugh echoed throughout the ship. "You're fools," he growled. "You're nothing compared to us. We have conquered worlds, defeated empires. Your primitive tactics will not save you." But Jackson didn't flinch. He had seen this kind of arrogance before. He had seen it in the eyes of every invader who underestimated humanity. And now it was the Zorak's turn to learn that lesson the hard way. The battle between Jackson and Vrax was intense, a true test of strength and will. Vrax, now relying on his brute force and cybernetic enhancements, attacked with unrelenting power. His strikes were fast and powerful, designed to break bones and tear through armor. But Jackson was no longer the soldier who had been overwhelmed by the Zorak's might. He had learned, adapted, and now he fought with every ounce of his strength. He dodged and countered with precision, using the Zorak's own arrogance against them. As the two clashed, Jackson's team moved to take out the remaining Zorak forces. They were fighting for their lives, but they were also fighting for something more. They were fighting for Earth, for their homes, for their families, for the future. Each soldier knew that this was the moment that would define them. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for victory, for the chance to show the universe that humanity would never be defeated. The action was fast and brutal. Jackson's team used their cloaking devices to move undetected through the ship, striking quickly and efficiently. They sabotaged key systems, taking down the Zorak's defenses and causing chaos within the mothership. But even as they fought, Jackson knew that the true battle was happening right in front of him, between him and Vrax. Vrax's rage was blinding. The Zorak warlord fought with ferocity, his cybernetic limbs swinging in deadly arcs. He was faster and stronger than any human, and yet Jackson was holding his own. Every punch, every strike, was a battle for survival, but Jackson refused to give up. He knew that if he could just get close enough, if he could just land a single blow, the Zorak would be vulnerable. In the midst of the chaos, Jackson remembered what had worked before. The slap that had thrown Vrax off balance. It had been a moment of defiance, a symbol of humanity's refusal to submit. And now, as he and Vrax locked in combat, Jackson saw an opening. With a roar, Jackson charged forward, using all his strength to deliver a crushing blow to Vrax's side. The impact sent the warlord stumbling back, his cybernetic enhancements flickering. It was the turning point. The Zorak warlord was no longer the unstoppable force he had once been. The humans had proven that, despite the Zorak's superior technology, they could still be defeated. Vrax's arrogance had been his downfall. He had underestimated humanity's resilience, and now he was paying the price. But even with Vrax weakened, the battle was far from over. The Zorak were still a powerful force, and the AI-controlled warships were wreaking havoc in space. The humans had won a key victory, but the final battle was not yet decided. Jackson knew that this was the moment when everything would be decided. In the distance, explosions rocked the sky as the final battle raged on in space. The humans, using their superior knowledge of their own technology, managed to disable the remaining Zorak warships. Their cloaking devices allowed them to move undetected, and their strategic strikes were enough to take down the massive alien ships one by one. The Zorak, once so sure of their victory, were now being torn apart, their once mighty fleet collapsing under the weight of humanity's resolve. Jackson and his team pushed forward, striking at the heart of the Zorak mothership. With Vrax's defeat, the remaining Zorak forces were in disarray, their AI systems malfunctioning and causing chaos within their ranks. It was a final push, the last surge of humanity's strength. And in that moment, Jackson knew they were going to win. With a final blow, Jackson and his team breached the core of the Zorak mothership, planting explosives that would destroy the ship once and for all. The countdown began. The Zorak's greatest weapon was finally defeated. As the mothership erupted in flames, the humans emerged victorious. They had faced the odds, fought with everything they had, and triumphed over the Zorak's advanced technology. The evil, represented by the Zorak, and their relentless pursuit of conquest, had been defeated by the good, the humans, who fought with bravery, heart, and a deep love for their home. The explosion that followed was deafening. The Zorak mothership, once a symbol of invincibility, was reduced to nothing more than a cloud of debris. The humans had won. And as Jackson and his team stood amidst the ruins, they knew they had not only secured Earth's future, but had also shown the universe that no matter how powerful the enemy, humanity would always rise to the challenge. In the end, it was the classic good vs. evil theme that prevailed. The underdog humans, with their unyielding spirit and willingness to sacrifice everything for their planet, had triumphed over the seemingly unstoppable forces of the Zorak. And as the dust settled, and the stars above began to shine brighter, humanity stood tall, knowing they had secured a future for themselves and for generations to come. The dust settled, but the battle's intensity lingered in the air. The once powerful Zorak fleet, now a shattered wreckage, drifted aimlessly in space. The humans had achieved the impossible. They had faced overwhelming odds, fought against a technologically superior enemy, and emerged victorious. But the price of that victory was steep. Jackson stood with his team amidst the debris, looking out at the remnants of the Zorak forces. The fight was over, but the cost of this victory had been heavy. The ground beneath them felt colder as they surveyed the battlefield. The air was thick with the weight of loss. Many brave soldiers had laid down their lives to bring Earth back from the brink of destruction. The names of those who had fallen, like Bonner, would forever be etched in the hearts of those who had survived. Their sacrifice would never be forgotten. As Jackson turned his eyes toward the horizon, he couldn't help but feel a mixture of pride and grief. Pride for what they had accomplished, for the strength and resilience humanity had shown, but also grief for the cost they had paid. The Zorak might have been defeated, but the human spirit had been tested in ways no one could have imagined. It was in this moment that Jackson's thoughts shifted to Emily, his younger sister, who had been taken captive by the Zorak, during the early stages of the invasion. She had been a symbol of humanity's vulnerability, held hostage by the invaders as a bargaining chip. Jackson had always been determined to rescue her, but he had known it would be a dangerous and difficult task. Now, with the Zorak fleet defeated, he could finally breathe easy. She was safe. As Jackson walked toward the makeshift camp where the survivors had gathered, his heart began to race. There, standing among the soldiers, was Emily. She was different, worn and tired, but alive. Her eyes met his, and for a brief moment, everything else faded away. The horrors of the war, the lives lost, the sacrifices made, all of it seemed to disappear in that instant. There, standing before him, was the person he had fought for, the one who had kept him going through the darkest days of the conflict. "Jackson," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Her eyes welled up with tears, and she rushed into his arms. He held her tightly, not saying a word, but letting the emotions flood through him. He had promised her that he would bring her home, and now he had kept that promise. "You're safe," Jackson said, his voice thick with emotion. "I told you I'd come for you, Em. I told you I would never let anything happen to you." Emily clung to him, her sobs quiet but heavy. "I never thought you'd make it," she whispered. "I thought I was lost forever, but you came. You saved me." Jackson didn't have the words to respond. There was nothing he could say that would make this moment more real. They were together, and that was all that mattered. His resolve, his strength, everything he had fought for, had led him to this point. He had fought for Earth, for his comrades, but most of all for Emily. And now, with the Zorak defeated and his sister safely in his arms, Jackson felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. But even as he held her, the memories of the fallen still lingered in his mind. Bonner, the brave soldier who had stood by his side through thick and thin, was gone. The others, each person who had sacrificed their life for the greater good, would never be forgotten. Their families would mourn their loss, and the survivors would carry their memories forever. The team gathered in silence as they paid their respects to the fallen soldiers. Jackson stood at the front, his face grim but resolute. He was the leader now, the one who had guided them through the darkest hours. But in his heart, he knew that their victory had not been without its price. As they stood together, looking out at the wreckage of the Zorak fleet, Jackson reflected on the events that had led them here. He thought about the battles, the sacrifices, and the unrelenting drive that had pushed humanity to fight when all seemed lost. They had faced an enemy that was technologically advanced and seemingly unstoppable, but they had fought back with courage, with determination, and with a love for their planet that no enemy could match. Humanity's strength, Jackson realized, didn't lie in their weapons or their technology. It wasn't their advanced cloaking devices, their high-tech weapons, or their superior strategy that had won the war. It was their spirit, their willingness to fight for what they loved, to protect what mattered most to them, had been the key to their success. They had faced a foe that underestimated them at every turn, believing that technology alone would guarantee victory. But the Zorak had forgotten one important thing. The heart of humanity could never be defeated. With the final remnants of the Zorak forces drifting silently in space, Jackson turned to his team. "We've won, but the battle isn't over," he said, his voice steady. "We've shown the universe that we will fight, no matter the odds. But we've also learned something important. It's not just about defeating the enemy. It's about holding on to what makes us human. Our resilience, our love, our will to survive. That's what makes us strong." The team nodded, their faces a mix of exhaustion and pride. They had fought for everything they had, and now they had secured a future for humanity. But even in the wake of their victory, they knew that the universe was vast and full of unknown threats. The war with the Zorak might be over, but humanity's journey was far from finished. As Jackson stood there, watching the sun rise over the wreckage of the Zorak fleet, he couldn't help but feel a sense of hope for the future. Humanity had survived, and now it had the chance to rebuild. There was so much work to do, so many lives to honor. But Jackson knew that Earth would rise from the ashes stronger than ever. And as he looked at his sister, the one person he had fought for above all else, he knew that they had all earned their peace. The story of humanity's victory over the Zorak was not just a tale of war. It was a story of sacrifice, of resilience, and of the unbreakable bond between humans. It was a story of what it means to never give up, to stand strong in the face of overwhelming odds, and to fight for the people and the planet you love. And as Jackson looked at the stars, knowing that Earth was safe once more, he realized that this was only the beginning. Humanity had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. And now it was time to move forward, to rebuild, and to ensure that the legacy of the fallen would live on in every corner of the galaxy. The universe had witnessed the power of the human spirit, and it would never forget.